Hi folks, hope you're okay today. We're just going to look at the resurrection of Jesus. It's a debate by Russell de Silvestro and Matt McCormack, and I'm just going to talk about some of the debate in there and what I thought. So I'll call it Objections to the Resurrection. First of all, there are four minimal facts, and the debater Russell de Silvestro uses Richard Swinburne and William Lane Craig. The four facts are as follows. Number one, Jesus is buried in a tomb. Number two, the tomb is found empty by the women. Number three, the appearance of Jesus. And number four, the disciples believed that Jesus had been resurrected. These four facts generally scholarship would agree with. So there are various lines of evidence why scholars have come to that conclusion. So for example, number one, Jesus is buried in the tomb. Various strands of evidence such as 1 Corinthians 15 is in early historical source material. Number two, the tomb is seen empty by women. Women in Israel at that time was not seen as important, so their testimony would not have been given for the resurrection, yet it's given, so it's highly likely that's true. Appearances of Jesus, multiple sources, so you got Luke, you got John, that testify to this. You have number four, original disciples believed he rose from the dead. The Jews didn't believe that the Messiah would even die, let alone rise from the dead. Die as a crucified. So that's basically the minimal fact approach to the resurrection. And a couple of ways that McCormack tried to debunk it is psychological studies saying that people often had hallucinations when people died, so it was a normal thing, so that's what it was. Problem with that is again culturally specific, and also not true to the actual science, because these kind of these death experiences of having illusions of your family because they've died, they don't persist en masse for over 40 days as far as I'm aware. So but also culturally specific, they go against the facts that we know that they did see the visions of Jesus, and there were multiple visions of different people at different times, so it doesn't fit this psychological projection. The next thing is Chinese whispers argument that this guy made. Again, that doesn't fit because it's not culturally specific, because oral tradition was in two types, oral and written, and so some of this material would have been clearly written down at an early stage, which doesn't fit the Chinese whispers model. And it falls down with the 1 Corinthians 15 passage, which goes back to an early source of historical material right up to within a few years of Jesus' death and resurrection. So those are just some of the objections that have been brought against the resurrection in this debate, and do continue to be brought against, and we'll look at some more. Okay. Hi folks, hope you're okay. Today we're looking at objections to the resurrection. A couple of arguments that are made by Dr. Robert Price. One of them, and other scholars will do the same, that there are contradictions within the New Testament material. So for example, they say, well, there's a contradiction between Paul's letters and also the book of Acts. There are two different Pauls, would say Dr. Price, and so we can't rely on what Acts is saying or what Paul is saying in his letters. This is a misunderstanding of the nature of the literature that he's reading. So for example, the book of Acts is clearly dealing with the early church start in its evangelistic program. So when we see Paul preaching and teaching, it's principally as an evangelist, and so his message is applied differently than what he was in his letters, where it's more pastoral, dealing with pastoral problems. The theology is the same, but the application is different. So the debunking here concerning Dr. Price and other scholars is they very rarely consider the genre of the literature, the nature of the literature that they're dealing with, and if they do tackle that topic, they do get the nature of that literature wrong, which we'll go into in the next video. We're looking at objections to the resurrection, and specifically the scholar Dr. Robert Price. In the next few weeks I'll be giving lots of lectures and talks about this guy, and I'll be giving you much more scholarly references, but this is just more of a popular dealing with what he's saying. One of the arguments that he'll use is he'll cut up the New Testament and say this text says this and we can't rely on this, and this text that, and he'll try to divide the text against each other. But that's based on his understanding of the dating of the New Testament. He would put the date of the New Testament at a late date, and he would also make the authors not be the authors. So most of Paul's epistles, the Gospels, were not written by the people who the church claims that they were written by, and the Paul's epistles are not Paul's epistles. So they're late dates and they're not by the people they're written with. This is basically crass scholarship to the highest degree. Most scholars will grant you at least 7 or 8 of Paul's epistles, so that would be 1 Corinthians 15, and if you look at 1 Corinthians 15, there's very early source material there that refers to the resurrection. So it doesn't work him trying to put the literature at a far date. It doesn't work when he says that this is not written by Paul and there's been interpolation here, interpolation there. That's the other thing concerning interpolation. For Dr. Price, interpolations just happen to land for him at the right place. When he needs to debunk Christianity, there's an interpolation. When it suits him, there's an interpolation. So it's very subjective hermeneutics that he's using. As to the late dates, most scholars would agree to the general idea of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, which were written from about 60 to 90 AD. So there you have historical source material. Most scholars would agree for the writing of Galatians, the writing of 1 Corinthians, at least 50 to 60 AD, or late 50s, 60s. So it's ridiculous to and you can plant the date in there by showing how the Gospels reflect first century Judaism, where the Gnostic Gospels don't, where Paul's debates and discussions fit the kind of discussions and debates of that time. So the kind of scholarship that Dr. Price is using to debunk the resurrection, it's subjective, it's arbitrary, and it doesn't represent what's going on in the academic world. He would argue that he's trying to get people to think, but there's a difference between trying to get people to think and trying to rehash ideas that professional scholars have easily debunked because we found new information, archaeological evidence, literary evidence, manuscript evidence, that debunks this old scholarship that he tries to keep reviving. Okay, thank you for listening. Hi folks, we're looking at objections to the resurrection, and specifically by Dr. Price, and like I said, we'll be doing more scholarly reflection over the coming weeks and months ahead concerning this gentleman. One of the arguments that Dr. Price will use is that the Gospels are a reflection of Greek religions and Egyptian religions, thrown in with a bit of Jewish midrash and all the rest of it. Because he kind of takes an eclectic understanding of the Gospels, and as in it's just part of the religious mix of the time, he spectacularly fails in all counts there. For example, his idea that there are dying, rising gods has been debunked so badly that why he keeps trying to revive it is anybody's guess. He kind of claims that Christians have an agenda with inerrancy, but I think he has an agenda with his dying and rising gods, because nobody really in the academic world takes it seriously. So, I mean, I think even Dr. Wells, who's a professor in German, who kind of moved over to doing writing about the dying and rising gods, has even said that he now believes that there is some historical information about Jesus within the Gospels. That's a big change for a dying and rising god mythorist scholar. Well, he's not really a scholar, he is a scholar in German, but hey, that's the best they can do. So anyhow, Dr. Price gives this like eclectic mix. It's all Greek, Egyptian, Midrash, put it all in. It's not really historical. So when it's talking about the historical Jesus, it's not really historical. The problem with that is that even if you study the Gospel of John, there are many historical facts within that Gospel of John, far more than a lot more than Dr. Price would give. And if you look at the Gospel of John or any of the Gospels, you'll find that they faithfully paint a picture of the first century Judaism and that early Judaism culture. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there were various pockets of Greek influence within Judaism, but there was also very strong enclaves and pockets of very faithful Jewish people. So for example, you had the Pharisees, etc. So it's not true to the time that he's talking about. Thirdly, the genre of the Gospels is biography. It is not Midrash. It is not anything to do with Greek myths or Egyptian religion or anything like that. So he's got the genre completely wrong. The next thing to realise is that this scholarship for the dying and rising gods is basically a misrepresentation of the ancient religions. You've got to be culturally specific. When you're culturally specific and you look at Greek myths and you look at Egyptian myths and the so-called dying and rising gods, and you understand them in their context, you find that in the Egyptian religions they're not the same. It's not dying and rising gods. You know, it's self-projection. It's projecting Christianity onto the reading of ancient Egyptian religion. If you study the ancient Egyptian religion yourself, you find that there's nothing about dying and rising gods, as the definition would be given using a Christian concept of the resurrection. So it's self-projection, and that's why scholars don't take it seriously. I did this as an example. I studied ancient Greek hymns and found nothing of dying and rising gods there. I studied some of the ancient Egyptian literature concerning their burial rites. I found nothing about dying and rising gods there. There are these stories that you could change and manipulate to try and get to where you want to get in attacking Christianity, but if you actually look at it fairly and objectively, they're not the same. And a test case is Plutarch's essay on Egyptian religion. This is a very important source material on this topic, and he describes these ancient Egyptian religions, and there's nothing remotely like Christianity in his description of these ancient religions. Granted, scholars are very critical of Plutarch, but they also use him as a base for understanding those ancient religions. So thank you for listening. So basically, Dr. Price's scholarship it's not, when he's attacking the resurrection and he's saying that the Gospels are just a mishmash of Midrash, ancient Jewish, Greek and Egyptian gods and all the rest of it. Again, he's misrepresenting the scholarly world. He's using subjective hermeneutics, subjective understanding of how you understand ancient religions, and there we are. So we'll come back to some more later.